This is Michael Popok, and the darker it is, the more likely it's legal AF after dark. Trump convicted. We got all that. What happens next? What happens to Donald Trump now that he's a felon? Voting, gun rights, concealed weapons permit that he's apparently had with 2 weapons all this time. His right to freely travel, including abroad, all in jeopardy now that he's a convicted convict. What about the sentencing on July 11th? What goes into the mix for sentencing? Is it going to be some sort of probation or some sort of discharge without any sentence at all the way up to 20 years? We break it all down on Legal AF. Take a listen. Let's move it forward, though, because I think the audience is interested and concerned at the same time about things that could happen next. Let's start with the gag order, then we're going to get to sentencing, because I think that's very, very important, as you know, as I know you do, about what this judge on July 11th is going to do in terms of sentencing. Let's start with the gag order, though. I'll frame it, then I'll turn it over to you. Conditions of release. And let's all remember that in every court that Donald Trump is a criminal defendant, or in this case, a felon, a convicted felon, he is released subject to the discretion of the trial judge who administers the criminal justice process for that individual defendant. And his liberty is at the discretion of that trial judge, and the conditions of the release, whatever they are, in every state that we talk about during this podcast, Georgia, New York, DC, and Florida, Donald Trump has been released on his own recognizance, subject to conditions of his release. And they're a little bit different in every place, but there are some fundamental things that are the same. And in New York, as I said, as soon as he was out, unless the judge modifies them, he is still subject to all of the conditions of his release, including the gag order on the way out. And he Trump, you could tell, was mindful of that, because although he thinks that if he says the shitty thing about the person, the family member, the prosecutor, or the judge, and just leaves out the name, that somehow doesn't violate the gag order. Like when he calls Michael Cohen a sleazebag, but doesn't use Michael Cohen's name, but identifies him in every other way. My former lawyer who took the stand, who's got a podcast, it's a sleazebag. I don't think that technically it complies with the spirit of the gag order, but we'll leave that to your old office to figure that out with Judge Merchan. But the gag order is still in place, as it is with every defendant. Whatever the conditions of release are, they continue. Of course, Donald Trump doesn't like that because he's got a debate coming up on the 27th of June, which he wants to be apparently completely reckless and freed of any constraints other than the laws of defamation, to go after Joe Biden. And Joe, the president finally, after 2 years, said something about my case. I get to say something disgusting back. No, you don't. And your old office, and I'll turn it over to you now, your old office, in response to the letter brief, which was filed by 2 out of the 3 lawyers for Donald Trump, Todd Blanche and Emil Bove, but not Susan Necklace, who's not even listed on a CC there, as we can see. We'll talk about Susan Necklace slowly receding into the vapors behind this case, about what that means. But your old office has already responded about that request. So why don't you take it over from there?
Yeah. So look, I mean, Trump, as you said, really wants to be able to say whatever he wants to say and criticize people. And the Manhattan DA's office said, not so fast. They said, look, we have to protect, the court still has a broader obligation to protect the integrity of these proceedings and this case and the judicial system. And it should remain in effect at least through sentencing and maybe through appeal or post-trial motions. And so they want to brief it. They want the same briefing schedule for post-trial motions that the judge already set. And so keep it in effect until sentencing. And look, many of us have been wondering why Todd Blanche didn't, at the time of conviction, ask that the gag order be lifted. Maybe he did, and we just didn't hear about it. This is not a surprise. And then they said, well, because they're also appealing it right at the Court of Appeals, because they had appealed it and it had gone to the appellate division, and then they rejected it during the trial, and then they're appealing it to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York. The Supreme Court is actually the trial level court. I know it's very strange. And so I think that's where they thought they had to go, was that route. But they could also just ask the judge now to lift it, which they finally, I think, woke up and decided to do. It's interesting, as you said, Susan Nicholas is basically distancing herself. But, she was always, first of all, she's a real lawyer. She's a real defense attorney. Todd Blanche just became a defense attorney. I think this is his second client. Since he's been a defense attorney, he was a federal prosecutor for a long time. And Emile Beauvais similarly. So Susan Nicholas, who's been around for a very long time, if you notice, she never stood next to Donald Trump during his mid-break press conferences. Todd Blanche always did. She's always in the background because she's just a defense attorney who believes in representing clients, and she doesn't get involved in any of the stuff that Trump likes to use his lawyers for, which is smart. She just does her job and does an excellent job. And she's very, very good in court. And I think she's starting to distance herself even more now that the trial's over. So at least I certainly don't know why she didn't put her name on it, but it's consistent with, I think, how she's been. She didn't do the opening or the closing, which are the two most important parts of a trial, people would argue. She also didn't do the cross of Michael Cohen. She did do the cross of Stormy Daniels, but that's typical. A lot of people think that women should do the direct and cross of other women, that men, it could look too harsh, all that kind of stuff. So, and so it's just now we're at the point where the judge is going to decide what to do. I think where the judge is going to land ultimately is, I think he's going to continue the gag order for the jurors indefinitely, because the jurors never should become free game for the defense, ever. They should not. I mean, all they have to do is cite to Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman to show what could possibly happen, what Donald Trump does to people who are literally just doing their civic duty. If you remember, they were the election workers. One of them was a volunteer election worker who in the whole I don't even know where to start. It's such a long story, but it's the Rudy Giuliani defamation election workers whose lives were turned upside down and who were doxxed and threatened and harassed and all of the above. There's so many examples of people who are just doing their civic duty. And I think that the judge is going to want to protect them and all future jurors who might be hesitant and reticent to sit on a jury if they know that that's what could happen to them. So I think that's going to stay. I think same with the family members of public servants, whether it's Juan Merchan's, the judge's family members, or the DA's office family members. I mean, they should never, ever be harassed or threatened. And I'd say the same with the public servants who are the line prosecutors. The witnesses, of course, there's an interest in protecting the witnesses, but I could see the judge modifying the gag order to the extent that, like Michael Cohen, for example, is already talking about Donald Trump again. I could see the judge thinking that he is somebody it would be fair game for them to lift the gag order for him. But Stormy Daniels has not spoken. And so I would be surprised if she doesn't continue to be protected, as are the other witnesses. Again, it's just about in protecting the integrity of the judicial process and witnesses in general. No one's going to come forward if they know they can get threatened and harassed, et cetera, after the fact. So that's where we are with the gag order. So it's a stay tuned thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. And the judge has already sort of laid the foundation for lifting the gag order as it related to people like Michael Cohen. He implied that he's not going to allow his gag order to be used as a sword and a shield, where the witness, particularly in that case before the trial even happened, sort of hides behind the gag order, but then reaches out and attacks the defendant, and then says, "Well, I thought you had a gag order." So he's not going to allow that. And now that the case is over and moving towards sentencing, I'm going to give you some options, former prosecutor, and then we'll talk about this gap of time and what it could mean for any of these options. Probation, And they're not exclusive. Home confinement, jail, community service, and fines. That is the toolbox. You'll probably tell me there's something else I missed, but that is the preliminary toolbox of what Judge Merchan can put together in his powers to sentence somebody who just got convicted of 34 counts, 34 Class E felonies in New York, with an outside upper boundary of 20 years total for all of those things. And then at the other extreme, which is some sort of probation or community service. And I want to ask you to comment on that, and particularly, whereas in the federal system, you've got the federal sentencing guidelines that sort of guide the court. State in New York, I want to hear what is the alternative to that. Is it the parties getting together and looking through the way Just Security did and looking at all of the cases over the last 30 years or 40 years in which somebody like Donald Trump or anybody was convicted of this particular Class C type felony, and then what was the range of sentences for that? Does that go into the mix? And how does the judge, with the information that he's provided between probation, parole or probation and the parties, and then makes his own research and decision, and then those elements: probation, home confinement, jail, community service, and fines? What do you think? What do you think is going to happen here?
So it's a great question. You left one option out, though, which is that he could get, well, no, but I mean, he really doesn't have to give him anything. He could just say, a conditional discharge, the condition being that you just stay out of trouble and don't get whatever.
So number 6 is conditional discharge. All right. So far end of the extreme is this conditional discharge. Other end of the extreme is top end 20 years total.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a big range in the in this possible sentence that Judge Merchan. Look, Judge Merchan has a very, very tough decision here. I will say he is one of the best judges I've ever been in front of. He's one of the most thoughtful judges I've ever been in front of. He volunteered and is the head of both the mental health court in Manhattan, as well as the Veterans Court. Those are courts where people come before him charged with pretty serious felony cases, violent crimes, and other crimes. And those are people who come to him who are filled with remorse and want help and want to change. And he shows them mercy and he helps them, and he will sentence them to treatment or alternatives to help them get on toward a path of changing their life and transforming, as opposed to incarceration and punishment. And I bring that up because I just want people to know what kind of person he is and what he will do. He always does the right thing, and that's what I've seen. So whatever he decides, I'm sure is going to be the right decision for this case. He's lived it, he's breathed it, he knows what the legal issues are, and he will make the right decision. What do I think? What would I guess he's going to get? I don't think he's going to put him on probation because I think just it's very tricky to supervise someone on probation. Also, you don't put someone on probation unless you think they are going to comply with probation. And I think the idea of having a just absolutely, civil servant, type person who will have to supervise Donald Trump, who's guarded by the Secret Service and may be president, I think is just almost a ridiculous proposition. So I don't see that happening. I don't see Donald Trump listening to some person who he's not going to necessarily respect. So I just don't see probation happening. I also don't know how that would work if he's president, et cetera. That's on one extreme. On another extreme is jail time or prison time. The difference between jail and prison is jail is 364 days or less, and then that's called city time. Or if you get a year or more, it's called state time, and you serve it in a state facility versus Rikers Island, which is the New York City correctional facility. I don't see him getting jail or prison either, even though if his name was not Donald Trump and you just strip that away and you had a case of somebody who has been convicted of 34 felonies, and the underlying bump up crime was that he had to steal an election, or at least conspire, I should say, to try to steal an election. I can't think of a more serious Class E felony. In addition to that, Donald Trump violated the gag order 10 times and was held in contempt. So in front of Judge Merchan, he's also shown and demonstrated just an FU approach to the criminal justice system and to authorities. So if his name wasn't Donald Trump, the judge would say, look, I don't think you are someone who puts your own interest above that of society's. You break the law, you bend the law, you don't listen to authority, you do whatever you want. I had held you in contempt 10 different times because you didn't stop. And you show no remorse because he's going out and he's denying it. He's not saying he's sorry. He's saying he's innocent. And he's also attacking the judge, attacking the judge's family, attacking the DA. He held a baseball bat to a picture of the baseball bat to a picture of Alvin Bragg's head. Any other defendant would have been put in a long time ago and would get at least the 4 years. I don't know that anyone would get 20 years. I think that's extreme. I think at most, maybe you'd even get 2 of the counts running consecutive to each other. So it would be 1 1/3 to 4 times 2 would be 3 to 8, I guess, years. So it'd be a minimum of 3, maximum of 8 years. I could see that being the sentence of any other defendant. But I don't know that Judge Merchan is going to want to be in the position where Donald Trump is incarcerated during the presidential election, or when he could possibly be president. That's just not. It gets a little too close to the First Amendment and Article 2 of the Constitution. So I don't think he's going to choose that either. A fine he will never choose because, as he said when he held him in contempt, for someone rich, a fine doesn't mean anything. It's not punishment. So I think, and what I would like is to see him get sentenced to a conditional discharge, the condition being that he is sentenced to 100 hours, 500 hours, 1,000 hours of community service, but not community service that he gets to choose, the kind of community service where you pick up trash on the subways. And that's punishment. And I think that's real. And I could see that being meaningful. And I could see Merchan doing that. So that's the type of sentence I think he might take, he might consider. I could also see if he does want to sentence him to jail or prison, that he would consider staying the sentence pending appeal. Again, just to allow, because there is a couple of non-frivolous appellate issues that I think will be upheld, but they're certainly non-frivolous. So I think any sentence will be stayed anyway. And I don't think he wants to touch those waters. So that's where I think he's going to land. But I've never been a judge. I don't know. But that's where I think he's going to land, some version of that.
So a couple of points to pick up with on there. Way back when on sentencing. I would the average sentence for this type of thing is somewhere between 4 months and 2 years from the analysis that's been done by others. I'd like to see a sentence in that range. The problem is they're going to have to, besides the First Amendment problems, besides the executive privilege problems, the Article 2 problems that you identified, you also have the problem of when you send Donald Trump to jail, you send the Secret Service to jail as well. And so while our jail and prison system in New York is robust and very little surprises them, having to make way for Donald Trump and a group of armed Secret Service people in jail, because that's going to have to happen by law. He has to have Secret Service protection, even he doesn't forfeit it just because he got convicted of felonies, especially nonviolent ones. So he's going to have to grapple with that. One of the ways he could deal with it is defer it, as you said, but maybe defer it not only for the appellate stay, which is inevitable, but also to get over He doesn't have to sentence him on July the 11th, on July 7th or 11th. He could say, I'm going to wait to sentence you at another time, maybe, and wait for the election to happen. I don't think he does that, but he could, or he could say, I'm going to give you 4 months, but I'm going to pick up with it. You don't have to report until November the 6th or something like that. And then have those outlets for him to go do the appeal and get the stay and all of that. I agree with you. I think it's very difficult, although we'd love to have his head on a pike. And we'd love to, there's an element of vindication and vindictiveness and a little bit of vigilanteism that comes in with this, an eye for an eye. We like to, he committed those crimes and he's a first-time offender. It's hard to believe he's a first-time offender, at least at the time of these crimes. And yes, I think that Merchan's going to have to incorporate and integrate his bad behavior, Trump's bad behavior between now, the time of the conviction, all the way through the time of the sentencing. And I'm sure the prosecutors will point it out. And then you have those separate things that the judge hasn't yet resolved, which is the criminal contempt issues. Because in those criminal contempt issues remain important, not just because you can't let him get away with it, but because of the conditions of release in other jurisdictions are subject to him not committing any new crimes. And so there's going to be the argument there, although we're going to talk about Georgia and what's happening at that note. I agree with you on probation. I don't think he's going to discharge him. And then you're trying to find something that is an appropriate penalty and also sends the appropriate message to community and public at large, which is crime doesn't pay. And that is the needle, that is the camel through the eye of the needle that this judge has to come up with. I wouldn't be surprised if it went exactly the way that you described it. And I wouldn't be shocked if he figured out a way to give him some sort of jail or prison time. And by delaying or deferring elements and aspects of it, try to address some of the other unique issues that you raised, because Donald Trump apparently is going to be, regardless of what we all feel, the nominee for the other major party in this country to be the president of the United States. And that's a problem of their own making. We didn't choose their candidate. They chose their candidate. They want to choose a criminal for their candidate. This is what happens when you do that. I hear you trying to come in. Go ahead.
No. Thank you. No, just look.
Mm-hmm.
You make some really good points. And I thought of the same thing of he could push off the sentences, but it's not like he didn't know if he was convicted, there'd be a sentence. He would have done that at the time. They picked July 11th quick. So I kind of feel like that ship sailed. And then the other thing, if I'm Judge Merchan, Michael Cohen went to prison for how long? Years, right?
3 years. It was reduced a little bit because of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, he spent prison time because of this crime. Alan Weisselberg is in now for his second 5-month stint. And to have people go to prison, but not Donald Trump, not the guy who caused all of this, the reason we're here, there's a fundamental unfairness about it. So I am sure, no matter what Judge Merchan does, he's going to, his sentencing remarks, because what happens at sentencing, so what's going to happen just really quickly is Donald Trump has to report to probation, where the probation officer will fill out a form that makes a recommendation about what probation thinks should happen. It happens in every case. It's called the pre-sentence report. Then the parties, if they want, can submit sentencing memos where they argue for one thing or another and give all the reasons why. And then the judge sentences him at a sentencing hearing where the defense gets it, the prosecution gets an opportunity to make a public statement about what they think the sentence should be. The defense is given an opportunity to make a statement of what they should think it should be. And then the defendant gets an opportunity to make a statement, and they can or cannot. They don't have to make a statement. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll plead for leniency and say they're sorry and apologize to the United States for doing this and all of that stuff, right? And hope that the judge will listen to that. And sometimes they do. Sentencing hearings can be tearjerkers. I mean, I've cried my eyes out at sentencing hearings because that's where the victims get a chance to come and make a statement and make a victim impact statement. And the final thing that happens is the judge makes the statement. And the judge's statement is, usually profound and powerful, and it explains why they're doing what they're doing and what their sentence is, and really is incredible. And I am sure Judge Merchan's, this is going to be the sentencing speech of all sentencing speeches. And I'm sure one of the things he's going to talk about is the carnage that Donald Trump has left in his wake, including the people who have gone to prison because of him. And somehow he will also acknowledge the constraints he has if he had to incarcerate him, and if he does incarcerate him, and if he doesn't, he'll say, why not? Now, Norm Eisen, who works for Brookings and Just Security and who's been on this pod and is a friend, he, with Brookings, did an analysis of all the Class E felonies in the history of New York and what the sentences are. And he drilled down from that to the falsification of business records cases and what those sentences are. And only about between 10 and 30% of them get any jail time at all or prison time at all. But it's, and the fact pattern of those are very egregious, but this would be even more egregious. So certainly he'd be well within what's consistent with other cases and other where prison is justified. So, we'll see what he does.
I mean, look, the reality is the very few cases go to criminal trial and verdict. It's amazing when the funnel system in this country, federal and state, from when indictments happen to when, there's always that old line about if you're a criminal defendant, don't go to trial with the prosecution because you're going to lose. Like 98% of defendants lose at trial. But the reality is that there's only about a very small percentage of those cases that even go to trial. So the chances of conviction is not high either. But once you cross the Rubicon and you're into the world of trial has set, and we're going to talk in a way, we're going to talk about when we get to Judge Cannon about all the delays down there, contrast that with Hunter Biden, 8 months from indictment to trial. That's the reality. So I've seen Norm Eisen's, as I mentioned before, Just Security analysis, but that also has to be, for those that don't practice law, has to be put up against the prism of very few cases go to trial in these arenas. The fact that things went to trial and then, of course, went mainly against the defendant, and as you said, 20, somewhere around 20%, 10 to 30%, end up with jail time. Certainly, the theft of an election, which was what the jury has to have believed based on the opening statements and the evidence presented by the Manhattan DA's office, is right up there with one of the greatest heists of all time. You can't put a dollar value on our democracy, and that jury, how to find that. Welcome back. That was me and Karen Friedman Ignifilo. We do that show every Wednesday on the MeidasTouch Network, and we happen to call it Legal AF for a reason. And join us on Wednesdays and then Saturdays, where it's me and Ben Meiselas bringing it to you at the intersection of law and politics like no other show on the network or on YouTube. We sit at the intersection of law and politics, and we curate the top 4 or 5 stories right there so you don't have to. Lawyers talking about things, they know what they're talking about. How refreshing. That's why we call it Legal AF. You can either get us on YouTube here on the MeidasTouch Network, where you can free subscribe, or you can go over and pick us up on all the major podcast platforms. So, and by the way, before I move on, if you know all about Legal AF, we really want to take this moment to thank you for being part of our audience and our following. If you don't know about us, and please, we invite you to join us every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the MeidasTouch Network. You knew that. You're already here. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popak reporting. Heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.